Hello, everybody. Welcome.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So I'm going to call this work session to order. Today is June 13th. It is 1:01 p.m. This is Rules Committee. Let's go ahead and do introductions.
George Martinez.
Cameron Perez-Verdia.
Mark Littlefield.
Karen Bronga.
Anna Brawley.
Meg Zalatow.
Christopher Constant.
Felix Rivera.
And on phone, we have Scott Myers.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Anyone else on the phone? Nope. Okay. And also on the table.
Allie Hartman, Legislative Services.
Jennifer Vinniclausen, Legislative Services.
All right. And we have council here as well. And Mr. Ballin just walked in, as well as Flo. Mr. Farina has just arrived. Welcome to Alaska again. Congratulations on your immigration. So we have a lot on the agenda. I don't know that do we have service awards today? I don't think so. That probably should have come off. I didn't catch that. So, and in terms of a report from the chair, I will simply state that we have a transition underway. There is a lot of work going on. I just met with the incoming municipal manager, the nominee, been meeting pretty frequently with the mayor, and I recommend all of you take the opportunity. Ms. Wynn Pearson said she'd like to meet with everybody before she takes her role the first of the month. And so you'll be hearing from her to schedule some time to understand where they are, where you are, communicate, and that should be a good opportunity. Otherwise, I don't have a ton on my agenda. I can say for my unfinished work, the committee plan, we're not prepared to make that proposal today. I'm sorry, Jamie, if you're listening. She really wanted that done today, but there just hasn't been time. So with that, I think I'm just going to call that my report for now. No need to just talk. How about a report from Assembly Legislative Services?
Sure thing. We are missing Claire. She is out of the office today. So I am going to humbly give a report in her absence. We have three things to report on. The first is that we had a really great city nerd night last month. We hosted it at Aquila Space downtown and coordinated with the protected bike lane ribbon cutting. And it made for a really great event that was focused on transportation. City Nerd Night is recorded, and so it is available on the municipal meetings YouTube page. If you didn't get the chance to go or haven't gotten the chance to tune into it, it was really, really cool. There were 7 presentations, each 7 minutes long. And so really digestible, easy to listen to, pay attention to, and some creative ideas. Our next City Nerd Night is going to be in August. That'll be Thursday. I believe it's August 29th. And we'll return to our more regular location at King Street Brewing for that one. Claire has been working on lots of really great projects, particularly those that involve contracted services and that a lot of times is like a study or support in another way. So just to highlight a few of those that she's been working on, that includes the public restroom analysis. So that was funded by ARPA dollars a few years ago, and that's moving. Looking at local control of 5th and 6th Avenue, as well as a pre-approved plan study in collaboration with the planning department and some other municipal agencies. So those are all moving along nicely. And then another piece that we'll update you on, I believe we mentioned it at the last Rules Committee meeting, but we are piloting an aid program, and I'll let Jennifer speak to that.
Thanks, Allie. Yep, just a quick reminder that Legislative Services has launched an Assembly Aid pilot project with Member Voland, whereby we're sharing management of an aid. It's going really well. The benefit to the member is less time spent on recruitment, administration, oversight, training, and more time to give direct assignments that are useful to the member's work. The partnership is available to other members upon request. We think we have capacity to support 3. And we're happy to announce that we're teaming up with Member Bronga next. So that's 2. Just got 1 left. In addition, we're developing an aid training package we hope to complete by the end of the summer. Thank you to all of the members who got back to me on the survey questions I sent out. I resent that email today and would love it if a few more of you could weigh in on what's important to you as we develop those materials.
Right, and the clerk is not here. Do you have anything, Mandy? All right, thank you. So some of this will probably go pretty quickly. Now on to some of the red meat of our meeting. An annual report from the Board of Ethics. Board of Ethics, Paul Arvasti, why don't you come forward? Thank you. Right over here where there's a mic.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'd just like to introduce myself first. My name is Paul Irvesty. I'm the Administrative Hearing Officer here, but I also serve as legal counsel for the Board of Ethics. So the municipal code and the ethics code, it requires the board to submit an annual report to the Assembly Rules Committee. So basically that's what I'm here for, is just to fulfill that code requirement and also to answer any questions that anybody has about the report. I mean, the report pretty much speaks for itself. I mean, it's fairly simple. I didn't necessarily have anything to repeat off that. There isn't a lot of really statistical analysis in there. There were a handful of complaints filed last year. The board reviewed all that. That's pretty much in line with historical averages. So there was nothing really out of the ordinary. I know in previous annual reports, there was a lot of statistical analysis in there, but really with a handful of complaints filed every year, you can't really draw any really sound conclusions off of that. You know, for example, if there's 3 complaints filed one year and there's 5 filed the next year, that's not really a statistically significant increase in the amount of complaints. It's just in line with historical averages. So that's pretty much what the board reviewed last year as well. The one thing of note is that it is an all volunteer board. So all of the board members have, you know, they're very busy with their normal jobs. They did move to night meetings. I think it was a couple months ago where they started meeting on Thursday evenings, just because that was so much easier to coordinate everyone's schedules and to get the board to meet on a regular basis. So with that in line, they're pretty much just turning along right now and able to meet consistently. But I didn't, like I said, I mean, the report pretty much speaks for itself. I was basically just here to answer any questions that any members had about the report.
Go ahead, Ms. Alto. Meg, sorry.
Sure, whatever you'd like to call me. So this is really easy, straightforward annual report. One request to consider, and maybe we need to, I think code just says we have to have an annual report, but what goes in the annual report is kind of up to you all, is if there are any policy considerations with regard to the ethics code that come up during the year. That would be really helpful to know, or if there haven't been, so that we know which direction we should be thinking in terms of any legislative updates. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a good point. I'll make note of that for next year's report. I think for this year, there just wasn't any. I know the previous report talked about some of the updates to the conflict of interest section.
Right, and we do that annually, a review of Title 28 for elections. And so there might be some wisdom in having an annual internal review of the ethics code. And just, it could be as simple as a pro forma conversation that lasts 15 minutes, or it could be more significant. But it's interesting to think about, as just to riff on what Meg said, building it into a process. Anyone else? So I am wondering how the quorum issues have gone, because it was a struggle there, hit and miss for a while. And I hear you said you moved it to evening meetings. Has that provided some relief? Just what's your sense on the quorum?
It's just made it a lot easier. The sense on quorum is that they were meeting quorum. Sometimes not all the members were there, but they were always able to establish a quorum and meet their annual meeting requirements. It was kind of a struggle. I mean, there was a lot of, the clerk's office really worked through a lot of issues, just coordinating everyone's schedules, but that's become a lot easier now with them meeting during the evenings.
Okay. Any other questions? So, okay, then I'm going to ask a question. There are 3 ethics complaints that were addressed in the year in the report. So rather than talk about those complaints, would you share with all the new members who probably haven't gone through the washing machine what that process is like kind of a brief description of what happens when you receive a complaint from the public about a member, so they can kind of in the back of their minds understand a little bit?
Sure, absolutely. So the board does have a policy memo on its website. So if you go to the Board of Ethics website, there's a policy memo that explains what both complainants and respondents might expect from the process. So typically, and mainly that deals with confidentiality. So we want both parties up front to know exactly what the confidentiality requirements, what they can expect to remain confidential, and when certain information might be made public. So the first thing that happens when a complaint comes in is that the clerk's office will coordinate with the complainant as far as getting more details on the complaint. Then I will reach out to the respondent and schedule a time. If the board wants to hear from the respondent, they'll appear before the board, and then we'll talk about whether they want to waive confidentiality or not. But it's not I guess just the main takeaway is that it's not necessarily a simple process that can be resolved quickly, because the board will always have to hear from the complainant, and they might have to wait till the next meeting to meet with the respondent or any other witnesses that they might need to hear from. So just that process of scheduling the witnesses to appear can take several months to resolve. And then, of course, after the board has deliberated and made a decision, the decision has to be drafted up and reviewed by the board as well, which wouldn't be able to happen until the next meeting. So it can be a drawn out process. I know the board is really sensitive to that and takes whatever steps they can to speed it up. But it can certainly feel like that from all the participants. I would say that the number one issue that the board always deals with is conflicts of interest. So the disclosing of whether a conflict of interest should have been disclosed. All of those prior decisions, again, are posted sometimes in redacted form to protect confidentiality, but all those prior decisions are posted on the website so that people can read those and learn from past issues as well.
So a little bit of context. Someone had filed a complaint about me in December or November of the prior year. So 2022, 2022, God time. And the board didn't get back to me until July. I didn't even know it existed until July, which was a bit of a bummer for me because there wasn't a conflict, but the perception was there. And so I was easily able to deal with it and could have in December, but it didn't get dealt with until July. And that was awkward for me. So recognize that the process takes time. It's generally speaking, what Paul said there was, was the disclosure made? Was it sufficient? Is your biggest shield in this work is to disclose if there is a potential of a conflict there, because if there is or isn't, ultimately is a matter of each of us and us as a body to judge. So when the assembly has made a determination on the question of a conflict, it's really not reviewable except for the sufficiency question. Was it a sufficient disclosure? Were all the facts put on the table? And so you always want to disclose, because that shield will serve you well if you come into a time of conflict with people who are just trying to use the code as a weapon against you. That disclosure, I can't even describe how important it is. And so always disclose, even if you're not sure. So anything else? Any other questions, thoughts? Nope. Okay, well, that was an easy report.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you
Paul.
for your time.
So Claire is not here. Are you prepared to do the annual work plan?
Yes.
Okay, great. Oh, it doesn't have your name on it. It's out of order. No, go ahead, Felix.
All right. Yeah, Claire isn't here, so she asked me to step in and help out with the check-in on the annual work plan progress. So we're going to put on the screens the work plan so that everyone can see where things are. And essentially what we're going to do today is just go section by section and of the 2024 goals and priorities, and just check in, see where things are, see if we need to update anything, see if we need to change who is responsible for whichever action in the plan. And then, yeah, if there's any sort of general discussion folks want to have, we'll do that. So we'll go ahead and just, I guess, start with the priorities. So the priorities: housing action, municipal workforce, Port of Alaska modernization, public health, safety, and quality of life, and quality municipal services. There's no real actions on that, but any sort of, I think all of that's really captured in the various buckets. So let's go ahead and move on to the first bucket, which is the housing action. So first one here is the finalize the home initiative to simplify residential zoning. That continues to be in progress. So I think we're good on that one. Next is the launch a program to track short-term rentals. That one, yeah, completed to be towed. Is there any update on that? Are members doing anything new on that? Yeah. Okay, that's fair.
I won't say I'm doing anything new, but I have heard some more conversation, agitation out of the folks out of Girdwood. So I think that probably there will be something. I don't know what. It may not be tracking. I just have heard some. Yeah, but beyond what's in their plan, I've heard some folks talking about doing something. So yeah, so I'm not sure what it is, but there is something.
Okay. Then third one, develop a program for third-party review for commercial development. That one is completed. Check. Reduce hurdles for rehabbing old buildings that have non-conforming characteristics. That one is completed.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. That is in the category of, we did one specific thing, but it's a much bigger category for basically, not applying all new building standards, all those things. So I would stay in progress.
In progress. Okay.
Yeah, but that one piece is done.
Yep, and actually non-conforming characteristics came up in a different context under Title 21 at a recent meeting as attached to pre-approved building plans. So I think there'll maybe be 2 tacks happening for it.
Got it. So I see that. I see that Casey is on here. He's no longer on the body. Is there another member who is stepping in to help in with that?
Yeah, we can remove Kevin. And I will add that I have a project, and it's not in my list of things that are happening right now because I haven't figured it out yet. But that is a Title 21 innovation section that would allow for a more flexible implementation of the process of approval by the department that would need assembly authorization to implement that section of the code, but would expedite processes, eliminate steps on specific projects that are innovative. Could be rehabbing, it could be conflicts of zoning, anyhow. So that's another project that's just starting in the context of the removing hurdles. Dean?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I recall some members in the past talking about a safe harbor provision being added that seems to fit this category if it's not elsewhere. And I just wonder if that was still a live project.
Okay. And so I guess it's in a different place, Dean. And I don't know what that means, but we'll get there.
Awesome. All right. So then next we have the review open space requirements for multifamily housing. That looks like that one's completed. Create catalog of pre-approved residential building plans. Look like that one's still in progress.
It's been kicked off.
Yeah. That's what it
It's
says.
been kicked off. Oh, it's a kickoff meeting on
Yeah.
6/11. Okay, yeah, and it's underway, fully underway.
Very cool. Adjust planning appeal fees. Do we have?
I replaced Kevin.
You replaced Kevin. Got it.
And I guess you could put in progress. We've asked Dean to weigh in on some of that. We just haven't followed up.
Cool. All right. The next, investigate infrastructure funding solutions.
So I can speak on this one. I just met with the incoming manager, and in 2021, it's been so long now, or maybe it was 2021 for the 2022 budget. We as a body offered the administration funding to create a grant writing team to aggressively seek federal infrastructure funding. And the previous administration said, we don't have staff to do it, so we're not interested. And I am intending to figure out a way to find the resources to hire a team of folks who can write aggressively grants to secure some of the remaining 3 years of federal infrastructure money, because we've missed out on hundreds of millions, if not $1 billion. So.
Would you call that in progress, or is there perhaps a in
Yeah,
progress?
I mean, I literally just let the administration know that this is on my list of things for them. So it's probably budget 2024, for the 2025 budget. Yeah, but it's coming in progress, I would say. Anna?
Yeah, and I'll just share, I don't put my name down on this yet because I don't need more things on my plate, but I've had conversations with AWWU and really trying to track down, like, are there policy changes or what can, like, is there a role for assembly action there? So I don't know the answer to that, but just to note, that's something I'm kind of exploring. So in the category of investigating, but I don't have a project right now.
Awesome. All right. So then next one is review and update residential design standards. Still in progress. All right. I like that confidence. Next, continue to utilize vacant and abandoned buildings for housing. That continues to be in progress. I think it would be helpful for us to maybe get an update from AHLT at some point. Then next is investigate and update tax incentives for housing development and upgrades. That continues to be in progress.
So on that one, I'm gonna jump in and say, Ms. Elatal, Meg, has been chiding that there's a tax opportunity under the housing tax abatement section to go citywide. We created a list where it might go for this area and that area, but that section of the code has expired. And so it's no longer usable at this time. And so a project is beginning to get that updated and change the designation of the where to everywhere. And it's a 4-unit or more housing minimum. So stand by, coming soon.
Chris, can I put you next to Meg on that one?
Yeah.
And I think you, right? George, too.
George, too? Great.
Just George.
I got one of those emails as happens when council starts working on something. Oh, hey, did you know?
And I didn't know you were working on it. I have some separate projects, so. But I know it's expired. So, because someone inquired about using it yesterday and I went to the code and it said, oh yeah, no longer valid.
Which part of the code is no longer?
The housing tax incentive for 4 units or more that was in the downtown central business district, that one, it's no longer, you can no longer apply. It says applications must be submitted, I think it's by like April 2024.
I believe that may be 12.6
12, yeah, 6, yeah, in there.
in there.
One of the subs in there. And the code never said the expiration date, but the actual ordinance did. And so I went back to the ordinance and it was expired.
All right. So next we have the code safe harbor program to encourage development of old housing stock. Any update on that one?
Yeah, I think technically in progress, or just beginning. Basically, Jennifer is going to be doing some research this summer. So you could just say kind of preliminary research. And this is in the same category of how do you make it easier to reuse old buildings or aging buildings.
Cool. And I'd be happy. I know this was an idea that Forrest brought on board when he was on the body. So it's been something we've explored for a while. I'd be happy to work on that with you, Anna.
And I would just briefly add too, we kind of have to wait until we know who the building official is or who's acting, right? So I think that's also a critical path piece to this.
Cool.
Can you define that term again for us? Safe harbor? Is it like an action item from earlier? What's the distinction?
Yeah, I don't know the origin of that particular phrase, but it essentially means that if you're renovating a 50-year-old building, that you're not triggering having to bring it up to 2023 or 2024, whatever our current codes are. And so I don't know why it's called safe harbor per se, but I've heard people call it that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's basically just reducing the cost to renovate buildings.
And just to bring it into context, the specific issue that actually brought it was the what was the program? there was a program in town that they were renovating their building, and all of a sudden they learned they had to do all of these other things. And so that was the rationale for bringing this forward, is to create this safe harbor program.
Just a question, is it not part of the previous one up on top with if you scroll down a little bit, is that just a subsection of continue to utilize vacant and abandoned buildings for housing? Is that a separate project, or it's separate?
Yeah, that's separate, because that one's vacant and abandoned. This one's
Old
old
housing. Oh, I see.
Yeah.
All right, thanks.
All right, the next one, refine code to reduce building costs and processing time. Ooh, all right. Well, and I'm just reading off of this, so it might be different. And then Randy's not here, but any other update that folks may know? Okay, that's fine. All right, next section is quality municipal services. Wage increases for MOA employees.
In progress.
Yeah.
Yep, and actually, we can, I would put an other retention maybe, so we don't have a whole nother one, and then you want to throw George on there, and we'll be giving an update on some work that's happening. And that's all, in progress. So it's wages and other things for retention. I think that's the whole intent there. Otherwise, we have to add another one. Thank you.
Go ahead.
This is just, I'm not picking this up as a project, but just so folks are aware, I had a conversation last night. So Representative Jenny Armstrong was working on a bill to support paid family leave, a program that's basically employers can opt in. And she's continuing to work that. It sounds like there's just discussions at the state level. And so this isn't quite the right time, but for those who are interested in that, that is a great program that it sounds like may be able to move forward. There might be legislation next year, and it's the whole buying in, allowing for paid family leave so the municipality could participate. So if anybody's interested, just connect with Jenny Armstrong's office, or I can give you contacts. But I think that's something that the municipality, it really aligns with things that we've been working on. So I just wanted to mention that. Again, not signing up for a new project. Thanks.
Thank you. So next one is CMOA fully staffed. That's a big one.
I do have one thing to report. Very interesting. I think the only department at the Muni right now that is full staffed, at least by my review of the org chart last week, it's overstaffed, is the fire department. They have managed to maintain a full complement of their team. Something's working.
That's strategic. I am being paid for.
Yeah, something's working.
Just a clarification on that. Is that a policy issue? Is that a funding issue? Or is that, I'm wondering if fully staffing the MOA is the administration's role to do that. So I'm just wondering what maybe we should be more specific about why we're involved in that.
I think that it's that, but also if you think of the one above it, it's probably a very similar strategy. Let's wage increases and retention strategies. Why? To make sure that the Muni is fully staffed. And so in some ways, maybe that one is, it's the broader category of like the wage increases and those kind of things. So.
Yeah, thanks. It could be that with the new administration, maybe this tactic changes a little bit. And then next is update public records code to bring to date with current technologies.
That's in progress. The code stuff has been identified, but waiting for the administration change to talk with those departments that often get records requests.
Separately, we have a report that I haven't seen yet that was drafted by our outside counsel, Landy Bennett Blumstein, providing some thoughts on broader conversations relating to the public records code. And so, and in some ways we had an item on the agenda that's in part of this that we postponed, which was the records retention policy that was put forward to us. And so we are right in the middle of this conversation, and there's a lot of work yet to do. Because acquisition of public records is very challenging at the Muni, at the state, at the feds, and it doesn't necessarily need to be. And if you think of it in the context of the next item, the full implementation of the online checkbook, the module that I want to figure out to do in the next is how to upload contracts. So the checkbook identifies who received the contract and when, but you can't get the contract there because it's kept in a different system. It's a bit of an IT nightmare, and IT is very, very low staffed right now to do the work. But the theory is in the online checkbook, be able to click on the contract so you can read who got what for what and when and what the terms are, so that you don't have to make a records request to get a contract that's a PDF and get told it's going to be a month and it's going to cost you $100. Anyhow, so this is an ongoing project and it's very significant.
Just a question on this, is the public records, it seems like that may pair a little bit with the conversation on body cam data and access to that. I'm just wondering if that's a
It may
pairing.
be why it calls out video and electronic records, yes.
Okay, well, I'd like to be involved in that as well, if that's
Sure.
an option. Thanks.
Yeah, and it's all part of that same process, but it's broken at the meeting. Anna and then Karen.
So I was wondering if I could just have my name taken off of the online checkbook one, not because I don't care, but there's multiple projects that I kind of inherited right when I started. This was one of them, and I've seen phase 1 through. So if somebody else wants to pick it up, that would be great, at least at this point.
And I don't need anyone else, but if you want to join the fun, come along. But it's an IT problem at this point. Karen, yeah.
Thanks. I just wanted to mention, and you may know something about this, Chris, when I met with Bianca Cross and was talking about the difficulty getting records about how many accidents for pedestrians on bikes in downtown, and you know how unwieldy it is to get that. And she said that their system for searching is really antiquated. I don't know how to say that right, but that it's old and that they later in the year are going to have an update on the system. I think something about Hexagon, but she said right now you can pretty much only search accidents and then you have to hand search for those factors. And this will allow you to say bikes, intersection. So I think that could be cool.
Great. And so, and part of that conversation then about the public records process, we can get an update on the various systems and tools that people are using and methods. And I think yours is not necessarily a public records process that you're discussing. Like the public records folks will tell you, they don't have to create a record for you if you make a public records request. The public records request is only for records that exist. So but what you're talking about is the tool to generate reports, which is a somewhat different thing, and the report's based on accurate data. And so we definitely want to have that conversation. And if the police are creating or buying into a system, does it have a public portal that the public can use? So we don't need to broker information from the police, because the public having access is what makes it transparent. So it's a very interesting conversation. George.
Yeah, just to add an element potentially to that particular workflow, including costs. Right, to the public. I think that's one thing that we've been flagging for some time now, members of this body as well, part of my time. So the costs involved in getting public information.
And it's a catch-22. Both sides are really tricky. There was a time when this branch was subject to massive records requests, like poor Jennifer Veneclasen had to deal with this, and it was a nightmare. And in the end, it's a blessing because she came to work for us instead of doing that because it was so bad. And the reality is the cost is the only thing keeping the people from being flagrant about abusing the system. And in fact, the costs don't allow attorney time to be included, because if we were to account for attorney time, it'd be so much more. But the attorneys have to review all the records to make sure it's not privileged information. And at the same time, then thousands of dollars for a set of records is absurd. And so what's the answer to that puzzle is the question that needs to be squared.
And that's what we're looking at all holistically in that policy change.
Yeah, it's like if we only had unlimited budget, then it could be very easy. Allie.
Yeah, I reported to the Community and Economic Development Committee last week about the Housing Action Data Dashboard project that's underway. And so just in the conversation about systems that the municipality uses where data is captured but not readily available to the public. That is one that, in my experience, could use some improvement as well. And so wanted to capture that and give an explanation for why I wrote that.
All right, awesome. We already talked about the online checkbook. So next is review of code for a community account.
One more on that.
Yeah.
Sorry. Interestingly, one of the elements that I wanted us to build for the online checkbook, the open government portal, was this link process to projects in your neighborhood that you could see who the contractor is, who the project manager is. But we had at one of our meetings last week, maybe 2 weeks ago, a presentation in which they showed us that that information does in fact now exist, but it's not linked to a public portal, meaning you would have to know it exists and then know how to navigate to it and then know how to find it. And so the good news is I think one major part of the plan that I wanted to see built is already built or is just coming online. We just need to figure out how to bridge it into the open government portal. So kind of excited about that.
Awesome. No, you're good. All right. So next is review of code for community councils for procedures of operation to ensure a system that adds value. And
So I've been trying to push that off to Daniel and Anna, and they've resisted. But I know there's a lot of strong feelings about community councils and the process and procedures right now. And at the same time, they have just hired a new director. And so there's something to be said for collaborative conversations with the new director to allow them some air and at the same time then to do the work.
yeah. So am I reading correctly that the 3 folks who are on there don't really want to engage in that, or am I reading it wrong?
I'll speak for myself. I am interested in that project. I think timing wise, I don't want to pick it up right now. And for the reasons that Chris stated, right, that there's a lot of work. And of course, they communicated there's some internal challenges they're working through. So I don't know exact timeline, but I think also it dovetails with the conversations around capital improvement program and other things. So I think we can say it's not in process yet. It will be soon, but it also is related to these other pieces, and just generally kind of how the community engages with government, right? So I could see this kind of evolving, but I'm happy to keep my name on there. Just not going to happen this summer.
And my only not wanting to be involved is I think that thinking about term limits and not being on the body in some 22 months, that this is an issue for people who are possibly going to be dealing with this process for the next 6 to 9 years, and how they want it to work for them and the broader community. I see the need, but I'm maybe a little too jaded now to be an effective arbiter of the process. And so, yeah, so I am supportive of this work and I'm going to see that it gets done, but I don't know that I have clear eyes. So, Cameron?
Yeah, just a addition there. I think a lot of us have strong feelings about this. I think that I often feel like it's an old model that we're trying to fix, and we haven't taken a step back and thought about a different model. And so maybe the executive director is the person to have that conversation with, and to have them begin to envision what's possible and to see what kind of support we as the assembly can provide with policy and with resources. But yeah, I think that's the challenge. I think is it needs a step back and a new sort of look. But I'm happy to engage in a conversation around that because it's something I feel strongly about too.
So, Ali, could you note up there that potential new models, seek potential new models or review other models? Because it's the first time I've heard that stated, and I think it's a fair and accurate concept. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll add 2 things. One, other communities have struggled with this. Some communities have actually abolished community councils, but I also just want to say and acknowledge community councils are separate entities from us. So the funding comes through FCC, which is also separate, and then they do interact with our code. So there's a lot of overlap, but I also just want to be super clear for anybody else listening online too. This is not the assembly just redesigning community councils, and that needs to be a conversation. And if there is any significant changes to the structure, it is in the charter. And so that could contemplate a charter amendment. So I just want to put all that out there, not because we shouldn't have that conversation, but again, just to recognize the limits of what we are doing essentially.
Well, counter to that though, is that the councils are in the charter, but the specific of how we recognize what the requirements are in the bylaws, all of that is ours in code. And so don't let the idea be dissuading to think that, oh, it's in the charter. It is in the charter, but what is a potential new model can be crafted through the code. And so
There's 8 pages to this.
Yeah.
keep going.
Yeah, we'll keep going. All right. Review and update MOA hiring practices to ensure greater recruitment and retention.
Mark's volunteering.
Ooh.
If you scroll back just a little bit more, Ali, that one kind of goes in hand with CMOA's fully staffed. If you put me on that one and that one, and together with reviewing their hiring practices and maybe getting it easier for the people to get on board. I know there's some difficulties, and I have a lot of experience with the hiring practices. So I'd like to get involved in those two items, and it's probably even the one right up above it too. But those two are kind of interlinked, and if I can get involved in that, I will.
Cameron?
Yeah, I feel a theme coming, and for me, it's that you've said this before, that I think over the last few years we've moved into a role because we had to, that we need to probably start pulling out of as the new administration comes into, and this feels like one of those, that us being involved in discussing hiring practices for the municipality feels like an administrative role that, that they can come to us if there's a policy change or if there's something. But I just wanted to share that I think some of this feels as though we've moved in a little bit too far, and maybe we need to take a step back as the new mayor takes office.
Yeah. So a little counterpoint to that, which is if you're going to do that work, I would really talk with our branch staff who is running into its own hiring challenges. Because, right, if we take it from our perspective where the clerk's office can't get through their roles, I know there's been some with legislative services, and maybe starting there that might alleviate some of Cameron's concern, because we do have some, right, we're an equal branch of government. And so when those things get in our way for effectuating what we need to do, so maybe if we start internal.
And my biggest concern on that one is what do they call it? The classification process that can take 6 to 9 months, and it just doesn't serve the municipality. And we have some important roles there. And I actually have a project I haven't started, and I've been chewing on this, and I'm waiting for the new administration before I get anything involved. And that's looking at the HR section of the code. There's a whole section of policies under HR where the HR department has accrued to itself almost all authority for supervising and discipline, and where the previous clerk had mentioned, I can't supervise and discipline my staff. Only a third party from the HR department can. And it's a broken setup because the people who know the person can't do the job, they have to wait and get someone else to come in. Anyhow, so there is some work that I know I'm kind of chewing on to look at the alignment, but I am grateful to the new administration for an open door, and I would prefer them to lead because they have 3,000 employees and we have 40, so, or 30.
All right. So I was just talking to Ali a little bit. So because this is a great conversation, but we still have a lot to go through, what I'm going to suggest is that we finish the section that we're on, go through the next section, which is economic development, and then maybe we just pause this discussion and then go through the rest of the agenda if there's time.
Yeah, we also omitted a 15-minute discussion, so I'm feeling okay on time, but sure, let's go ahead and take on the next two, and then if we have more time at the end, we'll come back to it.
Cool. So then so next is economic development. Establish the Anchorage Metropolitan Area Projects Program. Oh, that's the sales tax that we all heard about. Yeah, that's in progress. Yes, me, and yes, thank you. Then continue to. Oh, Meg.
On that one, I think you may have not a concurrent effort, but a effort within the body about how we want to approach it to integrate that work now into our process. And I believe the budget co-chairs and the chair are going to talk about that. I just want to give you that heads up. We're not trying to take over it, but we have to figure out how it integrates into our work to keep it in progress toward this expectation that's kind of being set, or are we even going to meet that expectation of a ballot initiative?
And I'll put a little specificity on that. and we discussed it with somebody, that there's some caution that needs to be communicated to the group that's working on this, that if they come to us in mid to late October expecting us to adopt this into a budget and a ballot question and everything with no time, it may not work out very well that it gets there this year, because the assembly has a process that we go through to address these concerns as well. So just some communication to the working group that while they think they have all the time, think that there's also this other public process that is by law going to occur.
Yeah, thanks. And for my part, I will say that I have advised the working group to that matter that we are sometimes, particularly when it comes to ballot initiatives and complex ballot initiatives, we like to take our time. And I have let them know that. So they are fully aware. And I think just to make sure we're all on the same page, a sales tax, even if it were to be approved in April of next year, I mean, typical sales tax lead time is like 2 years, right? So yeah, okay, just want to make sure we're all on the same page so we don't have to worry about 2025 budget. Yeah. Okay. All right, so then next is continue to improve and simplify muni processes and regulations for business.
Yeah, and I think one part of that, it mentions the online bidding system, and for that one, at least it was me and Daniel and Karen. I'm not actively working on another project, but I'll just mention there's been discussion about possible changes to childcare licensing code. I haven't specifically picked that one up, but it's out there and there's a demand for it. There's also things like getting your, starting a restaurant, all of the different pieces around that. And then of course, development. So just to say, I'm not actively working on that, leave my name there, but there's a lot of different pieces that probably get broken out at some point.
Great.
I know nothing about that, but I would be happy to work with you when you get ready to. Thanks.
Awesome. And then codify and confirm appointments for the new Anchorage Child Care and Early Education Fund Accountability Board. I think we have that ordinance. It's going to be before us soon. So yeah, in progress. Is there someone that replaced Casey? No. Okay.
No, but they are here.
Awesome. All right. So the next is understand and address economic disparity in Anchorage. All right. It's a big one. All right. Sounds like we don't have any update on that one for right now.
Karen wants to jump on though.
Karen wants to jump on. All right.
I expect that conversation will continue through the Community Economic Development Committee. And actually, today I was meeting with some folks who do modeling around city data and showing kind of some really great graphic representations of investment opportunities through the lens of economic equity. So there's work being done on that, but I expect to talk more about that at committee.
Great. All right, so then we're going to go through homelessness and then we're going to pause. So homelessness, create public dashboard on Assembly homepage of homelessness data and metrics or drive database decision making. That's something that Randy's been working on. Supposedly, it says it on here that it's in progress, but I don't have any updates from Randy on that. Ensure emergency cold weather shelter funding for 23-24. I think practically, well,
That should actually read funded through the end of the year, because it is, if the governor doesn't veto. It's
well, not through the end of
it really is. Like the math on it is $4 million. We were playing with it today.
Yeah.
We already budgeted for at least a month or two. So, no, we did.
We didn't budget that much,
We budgeted the amount for October, November, December, or at least November, December. We budgeted that. We fought over that. And if the 4 million comes in at the 200, I think, Ali, you might have the numbers. The math is there. We're through the year.
Go ahead, Anna.
Yeah, this should stay in progress. So what Chris said is accurate, but I think what we don't know is exactly what cold weather shelter looks like next year. And at this point, we don't have the money, and I don't want to get into the details, but yeah, there's still things to work out.
Oh, so if you're thinking winter goes through, June of 2025, no, we haven't, but through January. In fact, maybe now is the time to update that. The actual goal is 2025. I don't note that Meg has left the table for this conversation.
All right, cool. Then next one is.
Felix, before we move on, or I guess we didn't talk about committee plans. Never mind.
Well, Randy is coming on as chair. Cameron is going to be the vice chair of that effort. And so I think it's probably part of the committee work. Hate to volunteer you there, Cameron, but. Yeah. I thought you were public safety. Yeah, I think so. I think it was Cameron on the vice chair for homelessness. We'll figure that out.
Yeah.
It's the health policy, public safety joint thing. Yeah, well,
All right, the next one is identify sustainable policy and funding for ECWS. That's
That one I might recommend just putting the same people, not because I don't care, but if it's going to be part of that committee discussion, then.
I
And
think
happy
it's
to-
the same item. It's just one is short and one is long.
Yeah. And I think one could argue that that's also in progress because we did put in some small amount of money that's supposed to be recurring in the budget. Okay.
And I really didn't want the chair or the vice chair.
All right, then next is prioritize housing investments and policies to reduce the number of people experiencing homelessness and demand for shelter.
Can we take
That's
you off,
somewhat
Felix?
broad. Take me off of what?
Both of them, since you're stepping back from the leadership of the homelessness committee.
That's fine if that makes things easier.
Still want you involved, but then then that group can liaise with the coalition without any weirdness about the open meetings.
Yep. Yeah, I'm aware of that trickiness. Okay, so then, yeah, that one's. Let's leave it to the Housing and Homelessness Committee, and then we'll come back to it later. Continue to implement the recommendations from the Complex Behavioral Health Task Force report. I mean, that one is in progress, right? Yeah.
Probably needs a review.
Yeah, we should figure out where the update is on that. Okay, and looks like health policy is taking ownership on that one.
Is not health policy getting wrapped into?
Public safety, yeah. And then refine camp abatement code. I mean, we did some refining to it, but yes, there's going to probably be more investigation once the court ruling comes out. So yeah, in progress is good on that. Okay, I think that leaves us for
Okay.
now, so we can back to you.
Business goals, we'll come back to that. Next on the agenda, we have branch staff salary survey. Someone prepared to talk about that? Salary survey?
Yeah, I'm here.
All right. So filling in for Claire, what happened is she did a salary survey for the branch, got some really good information working, with the clerk's office. We really parlayed that, George and I, working with Claire, into this opportunity to do an employee survey generally. And so we went out with it's not an RFP, it's an RFQ. And we brought it down to a couple of different entities. We've been in consultation with the HR department. Looks like we've got someone picked so that we can actually have the survey out and the results by August. And why we're shooting for that time is a couple of things. One, we're going to be open and transparent and share this information as it comes through and with the new and incoming administration, but also we have some employee retention and recruitment funds set aside for 1Q. So how do we want to budget those or possibly leverage those funds as we also talk about how we're budgeting for 25, right? More information we can have in this really big policy area. Hopefully the more tools we can have or more tools we can come up with to effectuate our goals. And then we can be real about, do they cost money? If so, what do they look like? And how can we put together something that's a comprehensive package? So moved really quickly. Claire really set some great groundwork with what she had done for the branch. And it's just goes to show how us operating as a branch really kind of sets the stage for some of these broader policy conversations. So we're happy to take any questions. And then if you have a burning question you think we should be asking the employees of the municipality that you think would really cut to the heart of the matter, if you can send those to Claire, we will be talking with the contractor as they get on board and stuff, but that's a great way to give input, or if there's a topic, and then they can work to refine to ask the right question in the context of the questionnaire. But we wanted to share this with you so we can get your input and have you know that it's happening. It goes all the way back to budget amendments from this year where we had a small amount of money set aside to do this kind of work. Thanks.
Okay, is that it? Okay,
unless
then,
someone else
just the bottom line is we're historically underfunded relative to the administration, and we're fixing that gap. That's the bottom line. Okay, alcohol tax action plan and revised work plan, Anna and Jennifer.
Yeah, thanks, everyone. And then we also have Josh Hemseth with Agnew-Beck Consulting, so we can have him come up as well if needed. But we'll kick it off. So just to remind folks, this is part of the Alcohol Tax Strategic Plan project. We had a work session last month on that topic, and the three of us, myself, Daniel Boland, and Karen Bronga, have been working on it with Agnew-Beck Consulting and with a great group of steering committee of community folks as well. So we've been working through that. So just a brief update of where we are now and then where we want to focus the conversation today. In the work session, we had a presentation of the much longer strategic plan. You've got a printout of that minus all of the appendices. None of the appendices have changed. And some of the feedback was really basically that this looks good, but it's very broad, right? That it's trying to address a lot of the big issues that are in the alcohol tax. But how do we square that with the limited amount of funds that we have, and how do we be strategic, and how do we really make that useful? So that was one piece, is how do we narrow it down? The other one was generally how we want to utilize this plan, knowing that, of course, it's not dictating where we put money, that there are boundaries already in the charter now, as well as best practices and things like that. That's what the larger plan really covers. But what we're looking at today, and I'm going to direct you to this short version. Basically, we took the feedback, and thanks again to Claire, who I know is not here today. She really took leadership on this and helped us put this together. So what we have in front of us is a short version of the plan. So it does not make changes to the language, to the vision or the mission. And I'll get back to one thing in the vision and mission. It has our values, and then it also has kind of more specific goals. And then it pulls out some recommended actions as far as mostly around process. We talked about how does this integrate into the budget process? There's other kind of process improvements that can be made on the administrative side, right? So there's a set of recommendations in the plan. So what this document is, and also on the back, I'll point you to, we had this sample evaluation rubric that we can utilize as we're looking at and not just the assembly, but obviously, the municipality as a whole, looking at last year's funding goals, what happened, setting priorities, and then really looking at future priorities as well. So, and that's just really an example. So what we would like is feedback on this, but where we want to kind of focus discussion is one around the newly kind of narrowed down tailored goals. And then second, we want to have kind of a process discussion about how we want to utilize this as we think about the 2025 budget process. Again, not that we're going through and saying everything in here is what we have to fund in 2025, but that's where we're going. And so just to note on the goals, in the vision statement, what we ended up, this is the biggest change to the original plan. We took what were the original 5 very broadly worded goals. So everyone has access to safe, affordable housing. Everyone has access to whole person healthcare and supports. Those were the original set of 5 goals for the plan. Under those are strategies. So what we did is kept those because we felt like they really represent broad vision statements. They're kind of, more in that category and not so much in kind of more targeted measurable goals for the funds. And so if you flip to page 2, this is where we want to have the first part of the discussion, is really getting your feedback, really on the whole thing, but specifically on these 5 goals, and trying to really, again, target them to how we use alcohol tax funds. And these are, again, our first draft. And so we want to have some discussion today with the goal of also giving you guys a few days to read this and give some feedback. But we also want to get a pulse on if we can get this to a place that we can move it forward pretty quickly and put it on the agenda as a resolution for approval, or if we want to slow down and take some more time with it. So with that, that's really where we want to see is, what do you think of these 5 goals?
Go ahead, Meg.
So I make a disclosure as the executive director of the Anchorage Coalition to End Homelessness. We receive alcohol tax funds under the housing and homelessness bucket. So just want to note that for the record. I think that's important. And so I have not participated much in the creation of this or the underlying roadmap. And I am going to, for purposes of these conversations, talk about process or things from really the high level. And if anyone feels like that doesn't work for them at any time, please say something, okay? I think that's the best way that I can participate in this. So one of the things I didn't understand about the handout, partly around the mission, but the mission then drives the goals, is the mission split up our designated buckets in a weird way that doesn't reflect how the buckets actually are. It's behavioral health, homelessness, and substance misuse is a singular bucket. So substance misuse doesn't even make it under the mission. And then early ed is missing from the mission, unless there's some expectation that we're not doing that anymore because of the ACE fund, but I didn't get that sense. So I just need to close that loop. And then I wasn't sure if the goals were going to somehow align to the dedications, or if the goals were going to be separate and distinct, or would there be a goal for every dedication?
Yeah, I can tackle that one. I think on the mission, that is a good catch. We should make reference to substance misuse. I know behavioral health is a broad term that includes mental health and substance misuse, but it is helpful to call that out. On the point about the, in early education, the language about early education doesn't appear in the ballot measure, and that's really where we were trying to reference these lists. And then where those things connect is there is a substantial body of evidence that says the more that you invest in the first years of life, including early education, literacy, bonds between parents and children, et cetera, all of that reduces childhood abuse and neglect and so on.
Wait, you said the ballot measure didn't require early education as a dedication in the alcohol tax?
Not as one of those 4 specifics. And that's different than the marijuana tax, which was all about just.
Why have we had an early education bucket of the alcohol tax?
We haven't. We've always done it under the auspices of preventing child abuse and neglect.
Okay, we've just split it out weirdly on, I am most familiar with the budget form, folks. But we call it out as its own separate thing when you actually look at the appendix. So it's something that we should rectify on the budget side. Okay, hence my confusion. The other thing I wanted to point out really quickly, because this keeps coming up, I've received multiple telephone calls, and I don't know if there's some way to get to it, is access and process. Even the community or the Children's Trust monies that went through, there are still significant process hurdles of getting that money that is expected to be in operation and making programs go next month is still not out the door. And I don't know how we better capture that other than, I see it's on this page, but it is buried all the way down in number 9. And if the actual way that the grant process or the implementation of it isn't working, it kind of negates so much more. That was my other thing. I think is really important that we somehow raise up that, because we've been at that for 3 years now with no success. And so I don't know how we really elevate that. If we can fix that process, we will do a substantial service to actually getting the programs implemented, because if they're not implemented, we can't get through evaluating if the programs are even successful.
Felix?
Yeah, thanks. And I guess just to piggyback on Meg, So I get that it's easy to not include it in here because it isn't super substantive policy wise, but the fourth bucket of the alcohol tax is really the cost of administration, collection, and audit to the municipality to administer the tax. And I don't really see anything in here about that. And I worry sometimes when we don't call out not just where the money is going to go, but how the heck are we going to actually go through the process and set aside the funding to administer the alcohol tax fund. That's, I think, been a big issue in the past.
Cameron?
Yeah, so just a couple things. This looks great. It's very pretty. I third the concern around administration. That's certainly a big issue, and I think such a big issue probably should be called out in a more specific way here. So I want to just take a step back. One of the things that I'm struggling with is, I think, similar to Meg, where this fits into everything else, and I think to myself, a strategic plan for a funding source versus a strategic plan for a body of work or and so what's interesting about this is, I proposed to our current mayor 2 years ago, developing a 10-year public safety strategic plan, and have not been able to get that moving forward, and would love to see. There's some really wonderful cities out there that have created these 10-year public safety strategic plans that have involved health and fire and police and emergency and all these things, and have really created a new way of looking at what public safety is and how we measure it and how we show progress towards that. So this is kind of really exciting because this actually is like an early version of that, even though this is only for one funding source. So both, I wonder about the work of, because this seems to me to be really valuable in reporting to the public what we're doing with those funds. And that's really important for us to be really transparent and clear. Here's what we're doing with your funds, and here's the progress. But how that fits into a city's strategic planning, that's what I'm trying to figure out, how it fits. And maybe it just does perfectly. Maybe it blends into a larger sort of plan. But so that's what's on my mind is how this would fit into what I hope we're going to be doing in the next year or two, which is some very intentional strategic planning around big bodies of work within our city. So that's the second thing. And then just the third is really about that this is, you said that this is a shorter version of a larger document. I think, again, if one of the purposes is just to say, here's what we've done with your money, and it's a very easy dashboard, clear way of doing that, then I could imagine something, a one page of this, of just it being a really easy thing for the public to see, to make sure that it is transparent and we're being accountable. So, but other than that, I like the format a lot. Thanks.
Anna?
Yeah, thanks. Responding to a couple of things. I think, so the purpose of this plan, I just want to remind folks too, so there's communication work happening around alcohol tax, where it's spent, making that transparent to the public. And that is kind of happening parallel to this planning process. So that's out there. And I think that was one of the recommendations out of the plan, was really that's important and we need to keep doing it. But just to say that is happening. I think where the two purposes of this plan are really forward-looking. One is what process improvements can we make? And so that's what some of these recommendations are. And I agree with Meg that it is a really high priority to make those process changes. And that those are in the plan documented other places as well, what a lot of those challenges were. And so that really a lot depends on working with the administration, because a lot of it is really around staff and the processing of grants and all those things. So there may be code changes needed that come back to us, but just to say a lot of that work has to live with the administration and the staff. And the health department was involved in this and identified, challenges from their perspective as well, that I think are relevant. But the thing that we really want to utilize this plan for is, what are the funding priorities? So within the boundaries of what is legally allowed in the code, right? And then also the plan covers a lot of what would be things that we believe will have a positive impact, that have an evidence base, have worked before, get to our other goals of equitably distributing the funding and making sure that it's getting to many places in the community. And so that's where I think we really want to know, hopefully today, or as you guys read this, are these the right goals? And then also when we think about the budget process, how do we see ourselves using this? And we have an early opportunity this summer as we continue to talk about budget. So, so just to say, that's kind of what this is intending to do. And so so the real specific question is, what changes would you make to these goals? This was just our first pass at it. And then, do we feel like we're in a place that we could put this on the June 25th agenda? Like, are there major changes that people want to make, or are we feeling like this is good? And because that really just depends. That's our next steps, really.
Reality. All right, separate topic. Josh, I have a request. So for the main document, an additional appendix. So I think Agnew Beck has done some work along the lines of capturing the current status or fairly recent status of the Anchorage Continuum of Care for Behavioral Health and Addiction Services. And maybe even, I don't know if you've done some work on, if you were to think about the 5 buckets and the potential recipients, if you will, those providing services out there that might be fundable. What I'm hoping we can get is an analysis and a document that shows what the continuum of care is with current providers and what's missing, so that we can also use these funds to be seed dollars to promote the creation of elements that aren't yet in place that are necessary for a full continuum of care to exist. So I think that Agnew Beck is uniquely positioned to already possess much of that information, in particular for the SUD and mental health universe. And so if that exists and can be incorporated as part of this report, it would be a very helpful piece of information to have. It's like a current condition analysis of providers who are doing the work.
Sorry.
sorry.
Wow. I'm new to this and also how loud these mics are. Thanks, Chair Constant. I received your request about 15 minutes before the meeting started. And so I put a request out to others in my team to see if we could track down.
Yeah, it doesn't
if
have to
that-
be today by any
yeah,
means.
if that
This is
document
like,
exists.
as we move towards a final document, one more appendix would be, this is the current condition in Anchorage. What's missing? Like, what's missing? That's the important question. And we were meeting with the health department on the Anchorage Center for Treatment conversation. And there was just a request around the table. So what else is out there? What do we not have to do? What do we have to do? What do we need to fund?
Yeah, I think that seems fair. We'd be happy to include that in an appendix, and I'd be also happy to talk with you offline just to kind of maybe narrow in to see if we can find information that might already exist.
I believe you do already have it. So
Yeah.
I believe it exists from previous reports. Maybe there's some updates that could be done, but maybe not necessary. So,
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Cameron, first Dean, I'm sorry.
Yes,
He had his
okay.
hand up first, then Cameron. Go ahead, Dean.
Thank you. Just briefly, I understand that this was a draft. And I just noticed it's not indicating anywhere that it's a draft or a date. So for document control, I'd recommend that. So people being outside of this room, it's online too, won't know if this is final or not.
It's a fair notation for the 4-page summary 2024-2025 action plan document that we have before us. Note that it is a draft. Maybe we can amend the website where it's posted just to say this is a draft. Thank you. Did you have your hand up? Okay, first Cameron and then George.
Okay, I'm going to try again with my previous statement and just say that my concern with this, similar to what's happening with Prop 14. So I can imagine, for instance, Prop 14, the accountability board is set up and that sort of thing. And then we create an entire strategic plan around early childcare, early learning and childcare for just that fund. And then then how does that link to all the other efforts that are going on to that? And so I guess what I'm wondering is why we wouldn't have a roadmap for safety and well-being for the city, right? And that these are priorities. And then here's what the alcohol tax is going to fund within that. And here's what other things are going to fund within that. And so that's what I'm concerned about, of creating something that's a fully fleshed out strategic plan for a relatively small pot of money. And then as other investments come in or other priorities come in, then we have multiple strategic plans or multiple things happening. So it feels like this is a good time to say that, in that many of these could simply just be our priorities for our city, right? And then designating what we're using the fund for. And then the fund has a report just for the fund. Like, here's what we used it for. Here's what it did, right? So that's the thing I'm confused about, is why we would create a strategic plan and not just a report for what we've done with it. Maybe, I'm not sure if that might make sense. But I mean, I appreciate the work, but I'm just thinking ahead of how this could potentially be problematic in aligning to other efforts.
Jennifer?
I think that is a great point. And the short answer is we did this because it's something the Assembly funded through its budget process, and the Assembly voted on and said it wanted a strategic plan for the alcohol tax. So that's the kind of the why behind we went down this road, though I think it's fair to look at it from a larger vantage point too.
All right, we have a number of folks in the queue. So I have George, and then I think Meg wants to respond to that too. Oh, you don't? Okay, so.
I mean, I want in the queue to generally, but I think she has a direct
Okay,
response
go ahead,
as
Karen.
one of the people working.
Well, I was just thinking, recommended immediate actions, number 8 was where we were thinking of braiding other funding sources to make sure that we're getting the biggest bang for our buck, making sure that we're coordinating investments. I don't know if that's helpful or what you were talking about.
You want me to respond? No, I think it's helpful. I just, again, to the earlier point, these are homelessness, behavioral health, public safety. These are major sort of areas that we're trying to work on. So anyway, I get it. I don't want to discount the work. It's great, but I'm just trying to figure out how it's going to fit into everything else. So I think I made my point. Thanks.
That's an interesting question. $100 million in need, $15 million of revenues. It's in reverse, is I think an argument. George.
Thank you, Chair. It's not necessarily the same line of inquiry that Member Perez Verde was just on, but similarly, in the last regular Assembly meeting, I introduced a resolution that focused a particular policy outcome on access for all youth, for example, and it drew attention to this funding source. And then there was an interest in working on that particular piece of item. The challenge that I have is, from a public's perspective, this is all technocratic. It's just fundamentally. And what I mean by that is that I can say to the members of go to any Boys and Girls Club and say, we're going to make sure that kids have access because we're going to use funding from this place, and people will understand that. And so when I think of the prioritization, I can circle 4 places that would justify spending dollars in that particular way. But we've come a long way with spending dollars already, and the clarity of the outcome of an actual focal point is something that I want us to be able to get to communicate to the public the effectiveness of these investments that we're making into things they can grapple with and understand. And they're not necessarily policy buckets. And from that vantage point, to Member Perez Verde's point, I think our role is to help provide that guidance so that the urging of the administration to focus on the implementation of the policy guidance that we provide, I think, is the alignment of what I'd like to begin to seeing us articulate, so that we can have some clarity of some purpose, and so that the public can understand some real tangible outcomes that we can identify the buckets to support, but they shouldn't have to go through all the work to get through. What does this mean to the questions of today? And I think if we can make a clearer line to that, and perhaps that's through the policy statements of the resolutions to come, but then let's have a robust conversation of those clarity the clarity of those statements and how they can fit into this process. Thank you.
All right, Meg.
Thanks. I think one thing I heard Cameron saying is this can't exist in a vacuum. What I know is that AFD has a strategic plan, APD has a strategic plan, and they're first responders, and there's overlap here. And if you are going to have a city that's focused on safety and well-being, you need the three legs of the public safety stool there, right? And those are two of those major legs. And so how do we possibly be more comprehensive? And then to Mr. Martinez's point or George's point, one of the things that, right, policy choices are made by how you spend your money. How you communicate whether or not those policy choices are effective are through things like metrics. Metrics are expressly required in the alcohol tax. But what isn't required and what we've never done with the alcohol tax is set baseline standardized metrics for the various buckets. We aren't necessarily measuring apples to apples. We can't talk about the bucket as a whole. We talk about each program, but we can't talk about the impact and how we braid and leveraged those various investments in that bucket to drive toward a particular outcome. Because whether or not an investment in Best Beginnings over here and VOA over here or wherever they are in those buckets, are we asking them to drive in the same direction or measure the same thing? Or are we asking them to all just do different things? So like what you were saying, George, right? If we're talking about access to youth centers, we're going to ask them all to kind of be driving in the same direction, right? Access to youth centers, we hope has a particular outcome or can produce a particular set of metrics to show that that's an effective policy choice. But we're not even doing that already with the programs we're funding because we aren't aligning those so that all, everything's going in one direction. Some of it was intuitive, like last year when we had under first responders, MIT and MCT both funded there, right? Those things, obviously we were wanting it to defray police calls, drive towards better outcomes in behavioral health crises, but we never articulated that as metrics associated with that bucket or with those programs and that they were shared. So that might be some refinement. I do see this idea, it's somewhat captured on number 10, an annual reporting process on how the funds are spent and the progress made. But as policymakers, I wonder if we need to be more clear about the policy choices we're wanting to attach to the dedicated areas. Like before we even start talking about what might be funded, right? There's the why, the what, and the how. So the why is because we want to have a safe and well community. The what are these designated buckets, and then how we want to get there could be the defined metrics, and then the implementation follows through funding particular programs. So it's one way to possibly approach it if we are going to be fund-based. Partly to loop all the way back to what Cameron said, this is my brain working in real time, folks. But if you want to loop back to what Cameron said, right, if you can start to do that, then you can start to braid it into the larger whole of how you're evaluating these big areas in our community, right? And because APD is measuring, has some of its own metrics about how they are doing. Similarly with the fire department, similarly with the outcomes. I mean, there's so much data in the health department. And then you start taking all that data together and saying, are we meeting our visions and goals? Our vision, right? Are we meeting our mission through and our vision as we look at the metrics across multiple departments and multiple ways, right? Because we know what the vision is. So as we look at these different things, are they all driving that direction? And then you start to get to a larger strategic plan, one that incorporates the fund source, but doesn't necessarily limit the vision and the strategy to the fund source.
All right, Anna.
Yeah, thanks. And I really appreciate the discussion because we kind of had multiple scenarios for what would happen today in terms of timing. But in terms of where we are right now, and again, what we put forward here, especially these new drafted specific goals, were really just a first draft, knowing that they needed work. For example, utilize alcohol tax funds for housing projects and programs serving low-income households and people experiencing homelessness. That is much narrower than the very broad housing goal that was drafted in here that talked more about everyone having access to housing. But that is also a very specific policy choice. So I just want to point people back to those. And then really, in terms of where we are in the process, so the community work is done, the steering committee work is done. And really, I think we've taken it about as far as 3 members can. And so what we have done is brought it back to the full membership to ask, how would we as a body like to collectively own this? Do we want to own it? And then at what point, and is this the right version that we want to own? So I guess what I'm hearing so far is people still want to take time with this. There are obviously questions that are valid questions about how this fits in with other efforts, marijuana tax. We're coming up on our overall budget process. But I think that's really the question to the body is what I'm not hearing is that this is ready to just put on a meeting agenda for the 25th, unless folks have very quick turnaround and we come to agreement right away. But I think the question is, when and how do we want to move this forward? And not so much what is the specific timeline or days, but what is the next step for us, the assembly? Do we need to bring this to the admin? I know that a lot of the process improvements, again, are going to live with, the health department and whoever's doing granting. But that's really the question. And there is a valid question about, do we want to make this broader? The scope of this was always alcohol tax funding, and it was intended to give the assembly, in theory, more specific direction, guideline recommendations for the choices that we make in the budget for alcohol tax, as well as addressing these other questions of outcomes, how the money gets out the door, all of those other pieces. But so I just, again, want to bring it back to the rest of the members. What would you like to do with this and when?
So I have myself in the queue, and then Mr. Martinez, George. It's perfect you ended that way. Direction, guidelines, and limitations. I chafe at all of this restrictive planning. It's good to have ideas. It's good to have strategies, but I believe what's happening very much like with the ACE fund, the board, accountability board, which also rubs me the wrong way in the way it's framed. And even the conversation about the sales tax. We are the appropriators. And we are the appropriators today when the question is before us, or tomorrow when the question is before us, or a month or a year from now when the question is before us. And I feel like much of this, although it's caged or framed in a really lovely frame about let's be strategic about how we make these investments, is the intent is really to limit and bind future assemblies to how projects should be funded when the needs are before us tomorrow. And so I love the work in the context of setting out general frameworks and strategies, but I personally choke on the idea of us creating boxes that future assemblies can't navigate around. So I just want to put that conversation out there as a limitation of my own support of any of this that we're doing, that I want to see good strategy and good investments in targeted work, but I am not interested in hewing to third-party limitations foisted upon us because of all the rhetoric you hear out there about what the assembly is or isn't, depending on who has got the microphone. And so I honor the work that we do consistently over time. The wisdom of the body is an amazing thing. And so whatever we put forward, I believe, is general in nature and not binding. It just doesn't bind us. The work that, I mean, there's some binding with the quote accountability board because it's in the tax proposal itself, the charter amendment that was created. But otherwise, I believe in strategic thinking and also being flexible and meeting the challenges of the day. So I just want to put that out there. And I don't have an answer to where does this go from here because it's still in development, but I don't buy into the limitation of future assemblies. So I think the next one was George. And then Kim.
Thank you, Chair. You have a really good timing with respect to instinctual zeitgeist. I was going to ask a question, which was, is it the intentionality of or the belief of colleagues that I'm going to go back to the resolution that I introduced, because I do believe that some commitments you have to have binding language around. And sometimes you have to be able to be real clear about where those commitments are going to be. And so that was the intentionality, to make sure that we hear from so many families who don't have access. That's an immediate need, to your point, and the ability to be consistent about that with respect to, this is what we do in our community. These are the investments we will make, right? Those are policy questions, but they don't necessarily, but they can come with appropriation insight. So we can create both a framework of the language with intentionality, utilizing resolution, but we also can create the actual leaning into the appropriation of those particular policy decisions. And the question I had was with respect to the resolution that was introduced, and it was articulated that there was, again, interest in working on that and thinking of the way to connect with the marijuana sales tax. I think was articulated like, how can we find some degree of braiding or some resources in that way? So is it the intentionality of folks that members should not create affirmative statements in this direction without this work? It's to the point that the chair was making with respect to, my constituents are asking today about these questions now, and how we address those questions. Is it the intentionality of my colleagues to say, well, let's pause until we have all of this worked out, so then we can actually go through another process to start to address those? And so, and what's the timeline for my colleagues to work on really coming up with a thing that speaks to those particular families in that very specific way? And I apologize for the very narrow-minded nature that I'm bringing to this particular lens. But if I cannot see a particular outcome that is being asked for today in a horizon of work, then I don't know what produces that particular outcome later on, especially when we can make policy statements that help direct the body of the work that we're actually producing. So I hope they can live together and not be mutually exclusive. But having been asked to pause and then having this very robust conversation today, I'm just curious about the way members think about advancing affirmative statements in that direction.
I'll start, and then maybe Daniel, you can go. And I'll just say that from a legislative perspective, an appropriating perspective, unless there is some other restriction, like the language around the alcohol tax and what uses can be there, any member can produce and propose at any time a funding proposal, and we can amend the budget at that time. And so that's the simplest perspective. Any member at any time can propose. Now, how does a member get to 7+? That's the challenge of that question. And so the answer lies in the navigation of the timelines and the process. And so there's probably a ton of ways one could think about how to get to yes. You just have to identify if funds are there and that there is a majority enough to support the application. And then there's no opposition on the executive branch who has to implement these things. And or if the opposition is there, we figure out how to overcome it. So that's like the fundamental principle, unless some other bind is created that says we can't do that. And then it would take a majority to change that again. So it's iterative, but your timing, your proposal is valid. It's before us sometime in the near future, right? Separate and distinct from the strategic conversation. The question is, does it fit within the strategic conversation? That'll be part of the conversation. It doesn't have to, but if it does, you might get more closer to 12 or 10 or whatever. And so I think it's just that. But any member at any time can bring forward a proposal is the bottom line, unless it's otherwise restricted. So Daniel?
So this conversation did come up in the working group, and that was something early on. I said, I had similar concerns. I don't want to lock us into not being able to be creative in the future or meet needs as they arise in the future, be responsive to the community, and talking about, just the fact that, I don't want to limit our legislative powers. And there was even, I think, at one point, a little bit of back and forth in the working group, why are we doing this then if the assembly is just going to do whatever they want to do? And it's like, no, what we want is is a strategy, is a framework. And I think really to set a community expectation, here's what the alcohol tax, here are the goals, and here's what, because I think that's important, right, for the people who voted on it, and for taxpayers to see those positive outcomes. So I don't believe that there's anything in this document that in any way limits our authority. I think it's just something that we can look at and say, hey, these are the things that we can consider. And to Member Martinez, or to George's proposal that came before us, I think it fits well, just frankly, within this. And I think because I had reviewed this and knew we were going to be presenting on it, in the longer document, I think sorry, Karen. I think very specifically we can go through and be like, okay, here's the buckets that this hits. Here's the goals. I guess for me, I see an opportunity to make these things work together. Your proposal and to demonstrate like that can be like this new proposal fits in with this framework, and here's how. So I think there, when George and I haven't had an opportunity to meet yet and go over his proposal. And like I said, I'm interested in partnering with him on that. I think there was some things in the resolution to some of the shall language. There's things that I see, I think that can be improved. But I do want to make that happen. And I think the timing of that, it's perfectly reasonable for us to make a commitment and say that, yeah, this is a policy that the body is interested in supporting going forward. And we're going to keep that in mind when we get to the budget cycle. We said, this is something we're interested in. We want to make happen. Yeah.
So I have Cameron and then Meg and myself.
Okay, so I'm trying to get more specific. So a couple, I just pulled up the language, and the three areas. One is funding police, related criminal justice personnel, and first responders. Not public safety, police specifically. Second, funding to combat and address child abuse, sexual assault, and domestic violence. That's the second. Third, funding for substance misuse treatment, prevention programs, detoxification, or long-term addiction recovery facilities, mental and behavioral health programs, and resources to prevent and address Anchorage's homelessness crisis. So that's a lot built into one. But I guess, again, I go back to, I think what I see happening here, which is I like, because I like strategic planning, is sort of stretching this out a bit and trying to align it maybe to the priorities of the assembly in general. So, So I guess that's where I'm struggling, because I don't see a report that literally says every single word that's in code and says, here's how funds are going to be doing that specific thing. But I see a sort of a more general strategic sort of approach. So that's what I'm trying to figure out is this really a kind of a first version of an Anchorage public safety and wellness strategy, that because even the goals, if you just change the goals from utilize alcohol tax funds to address, and you just put address gaps in preventing, reducing harm to behavioral health, like if you took out the terms of alcohol tax, then this could very easily be a guiding document for most of our initiatives. And so that's where I'm just trying to figure out. But I think to the public, this can be confusing because it doesn't specifically say, here's what you voted for, and here's how we're doing specifically in the things that you voted for. So that's where I'm getting kind of caught in two different pieces. And so I say again that I think that these measures, I like them. I like a lot of them. And I think that's one of the challenges that I've had in the sort of public safety arena is really wonderful, measurable data points to determine, to show whether we're making progress on creating a safer city. So so in terms of giving you feedback on whether you should bring this forward or not, that's my challenge is I see this as a broader strategic plan that addresses a whole bunch of things that kind of aligns to the alcohol tax, but not very not really clearly, so that it creates a fuzziness there. So I feel like it almost needs to go back to, here's what you voted for, here's what we're going to do, here's what's happening. And then in addition to that, here's a larger strategic plan for how we're going to address public safety and wellness in our city and build that into something that we can align with our strategic priorities as an assembly and as a new administration. So.
Yeah, I'm glad you caught that last point, because I was going to say some of this sounds like there's going to have to be a bridge opportunity to sit down with the new team and the assembly and talk about priorities on these topics, because we'll get as far as we can, and then we have to bridge that divide. You're right on point there, Meg. And I have to say, we're going to run out of time here in just a couple minutes. I have 3 people in the queue, and then the plan is to move on. And so, Meg.
Okay, so if we want to be using this as kind of policy guidance, I like those words instead of maybe a specific strategic plan. One of the things I find that's really interesting about the alcohol tax, especially since a lot of these dedications also have department budgets separate and distinct from the alcohol tax. Alcohol tax is additive. And one thing we did with mobile crisis team and mobile intervention team is we used the alcohol tax to catalyze an idea that helped the police, because there's no mention of first responders, as Cameron mentioned, but it was all to help the police, and everyone was okay with that. But once it worked, we figured out how we could use that special fund source to then operationalize those activities back into budgets, right? Where the department could sustainably fund and do those things because they worked. So that's one thing I think, if we're going to think about this as policy guidance, do we want to, in certain areas, want to use it as a catalyst? With regard to what you were saying, George, I think that anytime you want to bring policy direction for a fund source, I think that's really important, and a resolution is a great way to do that. And if we are a majority and we agree, it goes on the table as one of a lot of really competing priorities. And then I hope that if it's on the table as a competing priority for a limited fund source, we can get to yes through compromise and right sizing it, and possibly with a vision for a couple of years out for how to use it, but knowing that we can't bind a future assembly, right? It is that delicate dance we have to do as policymakers to address so many competing issues in a way that constituents can feel heard. All of our constituents can feel heard, while still knowing there's more work to do. And so I think the sooner we know the priorities people have for a particular fund source, the budget process kicks off here, right? It feels like we just finished it and we're going to get right back into it. But as soon as we can start to identify what those priorities are, this process does some of that. I feel like this is a bit more here because it's really talking around the dedication. So a particular priority down here on the implementation in a bucket, I think get them on the table. I don't think it necessarily has to wait until whatever this is fully fleshed out. Let's find out, is there 7+ members who agree with that policy priority so that you have time to go back, refine what the costs are, how that implementation might work, and do you have alignment by the administration that you can implement it? I appreciate when people do that work in advance, because then you're going to present when we have those amendments, or you're going to work with the administration and it's already going to be in the first version of the tax when it comes forward and in that budget. So just a couple of thoughts about kind of the intersection and the way I view the alcohol tax right now, because it is so little money for such big issues. Well, for those of you who may not have been on the body, when the alcohol tax came to be put on the ballot the second time, someone was really reluctant, pointing at myself, to do so. And my reluctance was, it's not enough money. And I felt like we were promising too much. But credit to Mr. Dyson. He said we can either do nothing today or we can do something. So I voted for it. But this has always been one of my fears. Thanks.
The queue doesn't seem to be shrinking. Anna?
Yeah, thanks. I'm just going to bring it back to timeline, and because part of our purpose today was to find out next steps. And again, I'll reiterate, I believe the three of us have taken it as far as we can take it, so we can certainly do more drafting. But I think the question that we had to put on the table at this point was, what does the body as a whole want to do with this? What changes does everybody else want to make with this? Because I'm personally not wedded to exactly what this looks like. In a lot of ways, I'm agnostic to what level of specificity this goes into, because this is also a project I inherited, was working on the strategic plan. I think that the three of us have been working on it, but we're not saying that we have an independent vision from the rest of the body of what this looks like. And we've gotten a lot of community feedback, which really is what this plan is at this point. So just to be super clear, it sounds like we are not going to bring this forward for the June 25th agenda. We really do need either specific feedback on the content of this, and or if you have thoughts about next steps in the process. We talked about a work session. We have the budget conversations coming up, which are much bigger than just this fund. And then we also talked about the practical challenge of trying to get this done at the exact same time as deciding whether this actually applies to any decisions that we make or discussions that we have in the 25 budget process. So I guess what I'm hearing is this isn't ready yet. It is something that the Assembly funded and has already put money into. It is on our work plan as one of our priorities to finish. And so the question is, how do the 12 of us come to a point that we don't have to agree on everything in it? How do we move it forward and adopt this if the original intent of the Assembly when they funded this was to have such a plan? What does that need to look like? So again, I don't have the ideas. I think I'm not hearing that there's an immediate agreement or path forward on this right now, but I'm just, again, going to put it back to the rest of the members to think about, because we have to collectively come to that point, or else we're just not going to adopt this and it's just going to be another draft. So that's where I'm at. And again, I don't have strong feelings about what this should look like when it gets done. I am not trying to hold up other budget conversations, but that is the timeline that we're in. And that's the point that we're at right now. Thanks.
Thank you. And I have myself in the queue. I think that there needs to be a bridge built with the administration on the topic of the alcohol strategic plan, because as we work towards a reunified municipality where the two branches work in concert with each other, we need input from the administration. And so, and I just would want to clarify one thing. The language that you read, Cameron, was funding for police, related criminal justice personnel, and first responders. And first responders includes the fire department, includes the mobile crisis team, could even be the Anchorage Safety Center. There are a number of folks who are involved in the universe of first response, not just the police. I want us to be really clear on that. And then I think this conversation really at its core is because the inertia of our system is driving towards, let's spend all this money to address the homeless crisis. And every month, it's more money towards that. And the voters did not say that. In fact, they didn't support the tax when that's what it was dedicated towards the year before. So it's this upstream conversation and how we ensure that we're funding the things that are going to change the current climate in the future, so that when these investments are finally accounted for, our community has grown in a positive direction. And so I think that's, to me, the gist of this conversation, is to ensure we're not just unilaterally spending it on one of the items, that we make sure we're broadening it to tackle some of those other issues. So I just want to make sure that was it. Felix.
Yeah, thanks. So I'm just going to repeat something that I stated the last time that this was brought before us. And, I really appreciate this conversation and the fuzziness of this all. For me, if I were to advise on what the next step would be, I'll just repeat what I stated the last time we reviewed this, which is, I think we need to do recommended action 1. We need to go through this exercise. And I think going through this exercise will give us some kind of sense of the holes in the process. So when the new administration comes in, I would, if I were to advise, suggest that we do that. Thanks.
So I'm going to let the last word be Josh.
That's a lot of pressure, Chair Constant. I just wanted, I think there's been some confusion, and I just wanted to offer some clarity. So there's 2 documents in front of you. One is sort of the 4-page greatest hits of the 40-page roadmap. And some of the language that people have been like concerned about being missing is actually in the longer corpus, or, you know, not just the greatest hits, but everything. So the ballot language exists on the first page of the plan in detail. Then what happened is the group, the community steering committee that came together, started to create more and more shorthand for that. And so what started off as funding for police-related criminal justice personnel and first responders got shortened to public safety, law enforcement, and emergency response. And then throughout the plan, or throughout the roadmap, excuse me, the action plan is the 4-page. There's a number of different recommendations on strategies, including things that many of the members have discussed so far today. That did come from community and from numerous subject matter experts, including first responders and the Anchorage Fire Department. And then the last thing, the page 10 and 11 on the roadmap also includes a lot of items as far as like transparency and process that many members have mentioned as being important, including how do we braid with other things? How do we have conversations about this fund in conversations with other funds, including in the municipality, but also even beyond the municipality? And then there was also a bullet point in there about an online dashboard that would get to some of the level of specificity. So that was listed as a recommendation, just maybe not this year. And so some of those items got shortened into what do we think we can address this year or in the coming like 12 months. And that's the immediate actions 1 through 11. So I just wanted to kind of direct you that they're related, and there's more detail here that some members might actually find helpful and validating to some of your concerns.
Thank you. And there's even more information if you get it with the attachments. It's 75 pages or something. So, okay, we're pretty much out of time for the last item on the agenda, which is the kind of briefing on current projects members are working on. But I'll ask, is there any member of the public who wishes to be heard? Anyone on the phone? Nope. Okay, so no one wishes to be heard. So if anyone has a burning project they want to put on the table, now is your chance.
We have a burning project.
Go ahead.
I usually start off in order. So
Okay, go ahead, George.
I often pass,
You can go.
but I was ready today.
Okay, go ahead, George.
No, just to share, just to remind folks that this next Thursday, we do have the work session on the e-bike ordinance.
Yep.
And so that's going to be an important one, and it'll be here at 9:50 a.m. So I just wanted to make sure members checked on that. And also, Member Constant, I just wanted to confirm that you mentioned earlier activity around the expansion of the downtown housing tax
The
incentive.
expired one, yeah.
Coming up on expiration.
No, it expired.
When did it expire?
Like in April, I think, according to the ordinance, unless there's some language I missed.
We'll reinforce, but just wanted to confirm that
I can tell you.
there's a
actually-
body of work that you're describing is coming, that people want to work on that very specifically. And I just wanted to flag that myself, Member Bronga, are looking at that same question. As you all know, obviously that's what Meg alluded to with respect to when staff is communicating. Sometimes we just are aware of things. And we are particularly focused on, I wanted to just highlight this, folks, on the Muldoon Corridor District as a part of just our area of real heightened interest.
Mm-hmm.
But my intent was to move that into CEDC. There may be some other places of conversation, but CEDC is one of the legislative priorities where to look at the reinvestment focus areas or the tools and think about them outward. So we intend to, at least, we're working on a project to bring forward, but with the intent to push that into the committee, into the larger discussion. But we wanted to make sure that the folks knew that was coming and what our area of particular focus was going to be.
Yeah.
Cool.
So specifically, Part C, 16.60.020C says deadline for applications for an exemption under this section or this chapter shall only be accepted before 5 p.m. February 29, 2024. And so we're going to get rid of that and generalize it to the citywide, and then
Sweet.
it's done. So that's the time on it. So Cameron?
Yeah, I'm just going to take my time to say one more thing about this plan. I actually like the plan a lot. And I think that, that we don't have something like that in place right now. And I don't want to not approve something because we could do more, could do something, I think it's something that we should seriously consider talking to the administration about getting their feedback on, but moving forward, because it at least sets something in place that allows us to begin to measure progress in these really important areas. And I think we'll learn a lot from that as we do it, and then can evolve it into something more. But I wanted to make sure that my statement wasn't interpreted as we shouldn't approve this or we shouldn't move it forward. I actually think it's really well done, and I think it aligns really well with our priorities. And I think it's something that will really help us to make progress and communicate effectively about the use of these funds. So I'm for it. I just think we need to do more. So thanks.
All right. Mark. Thanks, Karen.
I was just going to bring up, I forgot on Tuesday night, but probably all of you got an email from a gentleman that lives across from Wendler, older neighborhood, small, single driveways. And during the summer, they have toys and they're getting tagged and towed for having toys on the street. And it's sitting wrong with him because of all the other things that we're overlooking in the city. And so I'm going to be working to see what we can do about that. It doesn't seem fair what's happening in that neighborhood.
All right. Daniel.
Okay. We have an update for you on the home initiative. Today, an S1 version was submitted to OnBase. And it is a far pared down ordinance from where we started. I think one of the things that reverberated with us was Member Martinez, George, your admonition to start with what we have. And so what this ordinance will do, and keep in mind, we've now done, I think we're at 24 community presentations, including community councils, Geotech Advisory, Anchorage Equal Rights Commission, Alaska Black Caucus, Alaska Native Sisterhood, some chamber groups, etc. We've decided to take a more tailored approach, and we are not going to do anything with dimensional standards. We're not going to do anything with permitted commercial uses. Our goal is simply to allow 2-family dwellings in all residential zones. So areas that are now currently single family only, R1, R1A, and R10. Those are the 3 residential zones that do currently not allow a duplex. They would, a duplex would be a permitted use. The other thing that it will allow for is detached multifamily, whether that's a duplex or multifamily. So you wouldn't have to share walls. You could have a duplex as we conventionally think of a duplex, or you could have 2 separate structures that don't share walls, but 2 units on a lot.
All right.
So that's kind of where we are.
Thanks. Anna, anything briefly to add?
Yeah, first, if you have edits to the alcohol tax plan, the short one and the long one, send it to Jennifer. She'll send an email after this. Second, please attend, if you can, the ACE Fund Accountability Board. Just to note, that is on the 25th agenda. The goal is to get that board created so that there can be members to it, so they can participate in the FY25 budget process. But if we have to delay it to July 16th, that's fine too, but we're going to have a discussion about it. So just please participate so we can get some feedback. Thanks.
Felix? All right, then we are over time. We are adjourned. Thanks, everyone. Have a good evening. See you tomorrow.